Today we are using the Event EQ Hive platform. We wanted to provide a few tips on how to make the most of your experience today. Join the session chats to share your thoughts on the content and connect with your colleagues about the session you're currently attending. We also encourage you to visit the exhibitors link in the lobby to learn more about our partners who helped us put this event together. Spend some time visiting our sponsor pages in the exhibitor section to see how their support can enhance your experience. If you should have any technical support questions, feel free to type your questions in the chat box or email capital@pcma.org for prompt assistance. If you have questions, If you have questions for the speaker, please use the Q&A function to type in your question. Look at the Publish tab in the Q&A section to upvote questions that have already been asked. The speaker will address questions at the end of the session. On-demand sessions are available after the conference 24/7 for your viewing pleasure for 90 days following the conference. So you will be able to access this session and the other breakouts if you miss anything. Once the session ends, please join us back in the keynote room at 4:10 p.m. for our closing reception featuring the Interesting Conversation game show. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Erin Prangley. Erin joined the National Association of Councils on Developmental Disabilities in 2017 as the Director of Public Policy. Erin is a senior government affairs professional with a demonstrated history of success working in legislative offices and nonprofit organizations. Prior to joining NACDD, Erin was the Associate Director for Public Policy at the American Association of University Women, where she advocated for the educational and economic equity for all. Erin's extensive experience on Capitol Hill includes serving as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Congressman Brad Sherman and as Legislative Assistant for Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. Erin is a graduate of the University of Southern California and the University of Washington College of Law. Erin, take it away.
Thanks, Christine, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are enjoying the conference. You are so lucky. I just looked at the schedule for today. It looks like there have been some very interesting breakout sessions, and many of them kind of relate to what we will be talking about right now. For some of us, networking comes as easy as breathing. All of us have networks. We often use our networks in ways that we don't even realize. And because of that network, sometimes because we don't realize what we're doing all the time, organizers have developed a tool called power mapping, which can help us when we feel stuck, when we've all been there, when we feel like, if only I had, a connection with this company, if only I knew this particular person, they would be a great mentor to me. Or if only I could find out a way to break into this particular industry, or I really want this job, how can I get there? We all have within us a powerful network. This power mapping is a tool to help us slow down, catch our breaths, and use our network to our advantage to accomplish a strategic goal. What is power mapping? We'll get to that, but what I want you to think of is, many of you have probably heard of the 6 degrees of separation theory. It's a bit cliche now. I know there's even games that people play with the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, and it's kind of silly when you think about it. But actually, this theory goes way back to the 1920s when a Hungarian writer did a short story called Chains, where he described how everyone in the world is connected by 6 degrees of separation. And then in the 1950s, a woman named Ethel Solis Poole and Manfred Koken actually proved the 6 degree of separation theory mathematically. And the theory is this, that everyone in the world is connected by 6 different lines of influence or relationships. Well, that was the 1950s. Flash forward to today, where we have technology and LinkedIn and this amazing world of where everybody is interconnected. I dare say there are mathematicians out there finding ways to connect each and every one of us by less than 6 degrees of separation. In fact, probably only 3 or 4, because of these wonderful, powerful new tools that you're learning about during this conference, and that many of us are just learning about within our own lifetime. So let's talk a little bit about power mapping. What is power mapping? Well, in a nutshell, power mapping is a tool to help you be responsive to the current environment, to be nimble, agile, and organized to reach your goal. The first thing I want to say about this as a tool is we all bring into power mapping ourselves. But what we're looking for are relationships, not only between ourselves and others, but between our organizations and institutions. We use these relationships in a given context in order to understand the value of these relationships and achieve results. We'll talk a little bit more about lines of influence and relationships and how those achieve results. So what a power map does is it gives you a visual of understanding of the lines and avenues of influences between yourself as an individual, other individuals and organizations. So this allows you to see how a particular target is influenced and help make connections between those influencers to achieve your goal. A power map will uncover a strategic plan to achieve your goal of building a direct and trusted relationship with the target. So why do I love power mapping and why do most people use power maps as a tool? Well, first of all, it builds on your existing networks. So you're not going to have to spend a lot of time going out and trying to research and take 100 people out to lunch and power lunch and do all those things. You are using your existing networks. You're uncovering new resources through your existing networks. This makes it very nimble. So whether you're using your networks to find your next job or your next client, or in my case, the way to pass the next big piece of legislation that I care about, you're using your own networks and that you've accumulated through your relationships to date. Power mapping is cost effective, so you're not going to need to go out and hire consultants to do this. You'd be surprised. You're your own consultant. You won't need to buy any additional software or invest in any great stationery. This is all what you can do with your networks. It's very cost effective. It's also gets results quickly. And I'll have a great example for that when we get into the examples of what a power map looks like. And really importantly for this discussion, since you're all coming to this conference with different goals and objectives, power mapping is very nimble. And when I said that, power mapping is applied in a particular context, that means it can be used in different ways. You could use power mapping to pass legislation, to get new clients, to get a job, to find mentors. And I'll show you a little bit of how we're going to do that. So how do you power map? There are 5 steps to developing a visual power map. The first is to identify your target decision maker. This could seem very simple, but when I want you to really stretch. When I say target decision maker, I mean who is the actual decision maker? Who is the person who can say yes or no? Who is the ultimate decision maker? Now, you're going to think I'm being very lofty, if that ultimate decision maker is someone who we read about in the news every day. Certainly, I can't put that name down. And I'm telling you, you can, and you should. And again, I'll show you the example about how we want to make sure that we're reaching the decision maker, the person that has the power to say yes or no. I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt who said, oh goodness, it was a great quote. Unless you're the person who can say no to me, I'm not going to listen to you. So basically, I find that person who is the ultimate decision maker and make that person in your target. Research your target. Again, because of the power of the internet, this can be done relatively quickly, and I'll go through a couple of things that are kind of hints to what kind of research you want to look for in developing your power map. Identify relational lines of influence. Lines of influence are simply people within your network who have influence over that target. And there are primary lines of influencers. You may know someone who knows that target. I like to say we're trying to find that relational line of influence so that the person has the cell phone number of the primary target. That's the type of influence lines we're looking for here. We're looking for people who have a direct relationship, a trusted relationship with the target. After you do that, you want to make a match with the influencers in your network along those relational lines. So you want to make sure that you are matching that person and getting a result. Finally, you want to make your plan to use your powerful network. I think the best way to show what a power map is to actually use an example, a real live example of what a visual power map does. My real life example happened about a month ago. I've been in the government relations industry for almost 30 years, but I had a particular problem that I needed a particular contact. Congress was passing legislation rather quickly around some issues you may be familiar with, the COVID-19 relief and recovery plan. This was a particularly crowded space for people who had specific needs, including people with developmental disabilities, the group of constituents that I represent. We had a particular ask that would cost money, but it was a particular ask that was important and had not been addressed in prior bills. I had exhausted all the regular lines of communication that we usually use as lobbyists and advocates to get to Speaker Pelosi. I knew from intel that that was the decision maker, that she was the person who was going to say yes or no. This was very top-down decision making by members of Congress and the House. And I needed to get to her personally, not her staff, not another lobbyist that I could hire who I needed to get to her. And we needed to get to her within 48 hours because our intel said that our proposal was not in the legislation and that this legislation was going to be finalized within 48 hours. So the first thing I did, as we talked about, steps number 1 and 2, is I identified my target, Nancy Pelosi, and then I began research on what I think I need to know about the speaker in order to create my power map. What relational lines was out there? What does she care about? Where are her closest relationship lines? I break these down into 3 categories. What your target wants you to know, what your target thinks you probably know already, and what your target hopes you don't know. And I'll explain why those 3 different categories help me identify relationships. So under the what your person wants you to know, there are things that all of us are very proud of. There are aspects of our public life that we share and that we want other people to know. These types of influences are primary lines of influence. For example, if you go and see what is the speaker most proud of, the place I'd look is her public website, which is, the Nancy Pelosi House.gov website. But if it's someone else, like a business or industry leader, you may want to look up their bio on their company's website or other places where they themselves are putting information out. This is what they want you to know. And from the speaker's website, I see a lot of things she's proud of, that she was the first woman speaker, that she's very involved in Democratic leadership. That's pretty much all she's done for the majority of her public life. That she's represented her district for 31 years, which tells me she's, pretty safe incumbent in terms of any electoral challenges. And she also wants us to know that her politics runs in her family, that her father and brother were also political. And then finally, she focuses mostly on national issues and not regional issues. So if I'm looking for lines of influence, I could look to her constituency in San Francisco, and I'm sure she'd be interested in that to a certain degree. But what she wants you to know is her work she's doing on the national level. She thinks that you probably know. Now, these are the things that identify lines of influence you have to dig a little deeper in your research. But these things are things that you should know in order to identify who might be a good influencer in her life as well. So you'll see that she has a strong connection to the city of Baltimore, that her mother was an Italian immigrant. You'll often find places where people go to school. Education is typically very important for politicians and professionals. and often many have strong connections with their alumni associations. Her role, so she doesn't vote on issues or serve on committees. So she's mostly involved in making the wheels move. She's not necessarily as entrenched in the day-to-day work of the committees. And the fun thing that she thinks you probably know is that she's received a lot of different awards. I love awards as a line of influence. So in Speaker Pelosi's case, she's very involved with Italian American organizations, specifically the two that I mentioned there. These are great lines of influence. These are things that she thinks that you probably know, so you can probably find lines of influences in those areas. And finally, this is the fun one, hopes you don't know. For politicians, this really falls under the line of, political things. So politicians don't often like to talk about their donors, but they're very strong lines of influencers. They won't put that on their public website, but these are influencers that have their cell phone number. They have a relationship because these folks are very important to their public life. She probably doesn't want you to know that she's quite wealthy. So she has a lot of investments, and she has made good decisions, and she's great. And she has some top donors from the University of California, Walt Disney, Alphabet Inc., which is Google, Stanford University, and Microsoft Corp. Now, all of those different things are lines of influence, parts of her life that are important to her, either in her private life, things she wants you to know, her public life, things that you probably already know, and then kind of, the public but not really talked about, but very powerful things, hopes you probably don't know, that these are people who have her cell phone number and have her ear. These are powerful folks. So, I'll show you what we did for Nancy Pelosi. As I said, we had to get in front of the speaker within 48 hours. That meant my normal contacts who probably wouldn't be able to help. They were kind of overwhelmed with COVID. States and governors were asking for things. People were dying, healthcare systems falling apart. My concern was just as valid and just as urgent, but it was smaller. So I was going to have a harder time getting this piece of legislation under the speaker's eye for a yes or a no. So I started the power map by putting Nancy Pelosi in the center. As you can see here, all of those green circles represent influencers around Speaker Pelosi. So Speaker Pelosi's in the middle there. Normally, when we think about whether or not we have a relationship with a target, we go straight to ourselves. And, I don't have a personal relationship with Nancy Pelosi. And, in the political world, I'm not her constituent. So those little red lines are sometimes where people stop and get frustrated. And you can imagine, the same thing if you're interested at a career change, for example, and you were very interested in looking into a particular industry, but you hadn't worked there before. You may get a little frustrated and say, well, I don't have a line of influence. I don't know that person. I'm not their constituent. I'm not their consumer. I'm not their market, whatever. So a lot of people will stop on those red lines. But look at what they're missing out on. The green lines represent other lines of influence. And I'm going to tell you how we went through power mapping this. With politicians, I always think first about constituencies. When you look at these bubbles, you have to think very broadly, not narrowly. A constituent is not only someone who lives in the district, but it could also be a business that's in the district. It could also be a person who has a family member in the district. So based on that, we thought, well, maybe we could find a constituent who we know who can make help introduce us to Nancy Pelosi, who has a line of influence with Nancy Pelosi. So I asked I asked around to see if we have a constituent, and I'll get back to that. I also looked at the awards and local groups and found the Italian American Association, but also other groups who had given her awards because of her work in women's issue. So I put a couple of emails out to some folks in those groups that I knew, just to ask to see if they had a direct line to the speaker. We also looked at her political contacts. I had previously worked for the Women's Caucus, and so I dropped a line to one of our one of the staffers from the Women's Caucus to see if I could establish that line of influence there. But ultimately, although all of these different lines of influences were being explored, it came down to our constituent, which really came through for me in this case. By looking at who were Nancy Pelosi's constituents, I was able to identify our member organization in California. I called our member organization in California, the state where she represents, and I asked that, I explained to that constituent what I was looking for. I needed to pass important legislation. Importantly, I said, this legislation helps you as well as me. And in fact, it did. So when you're talking to your lines of influence, explain to them, why this is important to you, but also how it can help them. In my line of business, just like your line of business, we have some really great supporters and friends. And a lot of the time, what's in it for them is just a chance to touch base with the target that you're trying to influence. That's worked for me before. When people call me as an influencer, I enjoy reaching out to my targets just to touch base with them. And I'm more than happy to refer a good idea or a good person to them. It raises my status as a trusted influencer. So our constituent member organization didn't know Nancy Pelosi off the top of his head. But what he did was he took this power map example and he charted out his lines of influence as well. And going through that, we looked at his current council members, no influence there. His former council members, wait a minute, there was an influence there. There was a woman who actually was a former council member who always talked about how she was one of Nancy Pelosi's delegates. So I said, well, that sounds like a line of influence. Would you mind calling her and having her, see if she's interested in helping us with this time-sensitive project? So he did, and she was, and within 24 hours, she was able to contact the speaker directly as one of her delegates from California and to recommend that she should talk to our organization. We were put in touch with her top aide, and our legislation was included in the final package within 48 hours. So if you look at the map, this is kind of a little bit wonky, but you could see that I had gone a whole bunch of different routes in terms of trying to find a line of influence. And ultimately, you could say it was the constituent route that helped me. But just as easily, you could say it was the political route that helped me, because the line of influence was through her delegate with the Democratic Party. But either way, this type of mapping helped me put out the lines of influence that I needed in order to get the result that I needed. So, Christine, are there any questions up to this point?
I do not see any questions. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to share? I don't.
So again, power mapping is, sorry, go ahead.
Nope, I said I don't see any, so keep moving on.
So again, power mapping is just a visual tool. And again, many of you maybe networking comes, as I said, as easy as breathing. But power mapping is most effective when you do this in a group. For example, I was talking about all the phone calls I had to make just now to, and emails I had to send to do this power map. But we're in a group right now. And what I'd like to do is a power mapping exercise in our group. And this is going to take some participation by the folks who are on this webinar. So I'm hoping you all are awake and have had your coffee and are ready to participate. What I want to ask you to do is to think about your own life right now. Let's use a real life example. Let's think about, your target. Who would a good target be in your personal life? And I'm going to ask for someone to throw a name out there so we can try to power map that individual in the next 10 minutes. Let's see if we can do that and see if we have anybody on this call who is an influencer on that in that person's strategic plan, a way to get the cell phone number or a way to get the connection to that target. So does anyone, we don't have to use a real life example. If you want to throw out just a fun one too, we can do that as well. But does anybody want to throw out a name in the chat box or just shout it out of a target that we would like to influence and why? Okay, guys, don't make me throw out another politician because that's just boring to me. Anyone ever want to meet a famous movie star? Nothing?
Dr. Fauci.
I'm sorry, Dr. Fauci? That's a great one. Okay, so let's go with Dr. Fauci. Does everyone know who Dr. Fauci is? Okay, Dr. Fauci is the head of the CDC, right? I don't know. Christine, was that you?
No, someone put Dr. Fauci, but I think that's a great one. But there's also Jimmy Buffett, Jennifer Aniston.
All right, let's start with Dr. Fauci. Maybe we can get to Jennifer Aniston later, but let's start with Dr. Fauci. Okay, so what we would do is we would put Dr. Fauci in the middle here, and I haven't quite mastered technology to do that yet, but I am writing it down on a piece of paper. And in your handouts, there are blank power maps that you could use as well. So with Dr. Fauci, there are lots of different lines of influences that I kind of thought of before we started this presentation. But the first one I want to point you to is professional associations. And I'm doing that intentionally because you all are part of a pretty significant professional organization. I did a little research on PCMA, and this is an international membership association. It has, chapters all over the place and has a pretty impressive board of directors as well. So if you look at your professional organization, oh, I'm sorry. Let's start at the beginning. Does anyone know Dr. Fauci? I just, sometimes people do. It's funny. I did this exercise with some folks from the Northern Marianas Islands, and when I said we were going to power map their member of Congress, somebody said, "Oh yeah, I'm her cousin." I said, "Okay." So under the action steps, I put the name of the person and the action, which is call your cousin. So is there anyone who knows Dr. Fauci directly? You're not committing yourself to do any work. I'm just curious. Okay. I didn't think we did. Does anyone know any of Dr. Fauci's family? No. Okay. Well, let's move back here. Okay, professional associations. So let's do our research. Our research is that we know that Dr. Fauci is the head of the CDC, right? So I'm just going to let you know that Dr. Fauci, what does he want us to know about him? Well, on NIH's website, it tells us that he was appointed director of NIADD in 1984. So he has been in government for a very, very long time. We also know that he is a Trump appointee and that he oversees some significant work. He did a lot of work in HIV. A ton of work in HIV. He's received a lot of prestigious awards. Wow, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, a bunch of serious biomedical research awards. Wow, a lot of health awards. He's a member of Academy of Sciences, National Academy of Medicine. Okay. So the first place I would look is your professional associations and PCMA. And I would look in the board of directors, who tend to be folks who are a little bit higher level and tend to know, folks who run in those circles. And you would not hopefully you wouldn't be surprised to see that a lot of the members of the board of directors have very strong ties to biomedical and health professions. So talking to your member organizations, I'm just looking at the board of directors. You have Bobby Hurd, who's the Chief Operating Officer for the American College of Emergency Physicians. So it wouldn't be bad to include a phone call to Bobby Hurd, who is part of PCMA's board, and just say, hi, I'm a member of PCMA, and I was just, calling because I'm doing some research and I'm, identifying, different projects for myself, and I'm looking for connections with Dr. Fauci. And if any of you are laughing at me right now, you're not getting it. People in Washington, D.C. especially love to be connected. And so one of the things that, you need to understand is that these folks run in similar circles. So if you look at PCMA's board, I'm looking at another one here, Diane Kovitz. Anyone who gets any kind of grants or funding from NIH are folks that you should be talking to learn a little bit about lines of influence and to see if anyone in this biomedical field has any sense of who Dr. Fauci is. So does anybody here work for or know anyone in biomedical or who works on NIH grants? All right, now I'm going to play my hand. You could ask me. Dr. Fauci I'm not part of PCMA, but I'll get there in a minute. PCMA also has a really great directory. So you may want to go into the directory and see if there's anyone from the biomedical field or for NIH, or find out that way if there are any lines of influence through your professional association. Another route is I'll just go right here. I am probably going to be in your PCMA directory. And since Dr. Fauci is a political person, you might want to say, do I know anyone who works, in the political realm? Well, there's this woman, Erin, who spoke at PCMA. Maybe she knows the politician. And in fact, I do not have Dr. Fauci's phone number, but I do have, I would think about my power map, and I would think about, where are my lines of influence with Dr. Fauci? And that would go directly to, the White House and to people that I know in the White House. So under action steps, we would put there, Erin Prangley has said she will contact the White House and see if there is any way she can she can arrange a meeting with Dr. Fauci. So that's one action step that you could take. Awards to local groups, from local groups. So again, this is just a little internet research. Dr. Fauci. So NIH has a list of Dr. Fauci's profiles, awards, and honors. And what you see here is Dr. Fauci receives the Aspen Institute's Citizen Leadership Award. Is anybody affiliated with the Aspen Institute? So you ask your network that. And who's your network? Your network is the group of people we have on this call, but also your friends and families who may be interested in helping you. Let's see who else. Once again, Dr. Fauci honored for his leadership in HIV policy and HIV/AIDS research by the AIDS United Public Policy Council. If you go to the AIDS United Public Policy Council, you could take a look and see if there are any people on those boards that you know, or anyone on those teams that may have connection, not only to you, but maybe they're in the PCMA directory, right? And if they're in that PCMA directory, then that's someone that you can call as a fellow PCMA member and say, I'm looking to contact Dr. Fauci. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm looking for a career change. I know it sounds a little crazy, but, I think that you could help me, try to find a way to contact Dr. Fauci. Obviously he's in the middle of a pandemic, so this is kind of funny, but this is what people do here in DC, and so you have to make it in their benefit as well under lines of influence. All right, where did Dr. Fauci go to school? So is anybody on this call involved in AIDS research or other types of activism with HIV/AIDS? Nope. Okay. Well, let's see. Where did Dr. Fauci go to school? just love the internet. Under things that Dr. Fauci thinks you already know, I always like to go to Wikipedia. So if you look here, you can see where he went to school. He went to school at the College of Holy Cross and then at Cornell University. When I look at school and education, of course, I look for alumni, people who he may have gone to school with, but I also look at trustees, faculty, and primarily. So if you go to Cornell's website or College of Holy Cross and see whether or not anyone in your connection knows anyone who's on Cornell's faculty or Cornell's board of trustees. Usually people will take calls from people from their alma maters. It's just, I think it's the way our brains are wired at young ages where we have our formative years at university. But there's a lot of power there, and I have made very strong lines of connections by going through colleges and universities, alumni and trustees to develop that power line of access. Let's see what else. So what else does,
Yeah,
yes,
it's Christine. Can you see the chat? Can you see? Because there's definitely been
no,
some chatter
how do I
feeding.
pull that? Okay, so I can't see it for some reason.
If you go to chat and then press public, so have chat and then public.
You know, it's funny because chat was on here before and I can't see it now.
So if Chris is on here, Chris can help her. But I can help you. So I'm going to go back up to, and thank you, Christine, for sending me that note because you were correct. So Christy Chang wrote, I know someone who knows him. And then Kathy wrote that just a note that he's the head of allergy and infectious diseases, not the head of the CDC. And then I shared with you that my husband's father does work for NIH. So I'm curious if he could assist us. And then he's a professor of toxicology and pharmacology and has grants for work he does for the University of Kansas. So they could have a connection. And then Jim Kelly wrote IDSA, Sandy Harwood.
I knew you guys were.
Yeah, so Lisa French wrote, he has great relationships with opposition groups such as ACT UP from the years of working on HIV issues in the early days of the disease. And Sue Stemley shared that Dr. Fauci was a speaker of the Bio 2020 annual meeting interviewed by Bio's CEO.
Great. So I actually figured it out. I found out where the little blue chat box was. So I'm now looking at the public. So since we have just a couple minutes left, I'm just going to look at the chat. And when you look at this chat, we're at step 4 now. We're making matches, right? So the power map matching has begun. So at this point, you've collected a group of friends in your network, the PCMA Friend Network, Associates Network, who are engaged in this now. So, Christine, for example, you put out there that your husband does work with NIH, so you'd be curious as what would he be able to do to assist us. What motivated you to say, hey, I might know an influencer line? I mean, for the most part, people, you, but for the most part, and in all truthfulness, I'm blessed to work in the area that I work with because it's for people with developmental disabilities. We don't have a lot of resources, but we know our power is in unleashing our network, right? And for folks at PCMA, I believe it's the same thing. So if you're able to visualize kind of this network and to have these conversations, using this power map, the very next step is taking Christine's name and putting Christine. And Christine, your action would be to have a conversation with your father-in-law and to just say, do you have any insight or do you know any influencers who have a direct connection with Dr. Fauci? There's this really great person I know. She's got a great idea. I really would like to get her in front of him. For the most part, people, because you have a trusted relationship, Christine, with your father-in-law, you're using that line of influence to connect back to the target. And if that comes through, your father-in-law may say, well, as a matter of fact, he's speaking at our university tomorrow. That gives you an in to talk to the university and to see the scheduling person to see if you can get Dr. Fauci. So let's talk about those action steps. Lisa French said that he has a great relationship with opposition groups such as ACT UP. from the early days of the disease. So then, Lisa made a good point. So maybe the next action step is for Christine to research ACT UP, to maybe make a phone call to ACT UP. If there's a reason or an influence line that you can use there, if they have a mutual benefit in you contacting Dr. Fauci, then doing a little research on ACT UP and developing that line of influence might be helpful to you. What other ideas? Yes, Christine, you're absolutely right that, remember the connections that you have and that so that when other people are approaching you, you can think creatively about ways to develop those lines of influence. So when Lisa asked, I'm sorry, not Lisa, who was it? When they asked their father-in-law about this, the father-in-law might be dying to go and to finesse that line of influence again, to keep that line of influence strong. That's a major motivator. Maintaining these networks is something that many of us do naturally. And, I really enjoy reaching back out to people who I haven't talked to in a while along my lines of influence. And then one of the best ideas I've seen so far is Dr. Fauci was a speaker at the Bio 2020 annual meeting, interviewed by Bio's CEO, and that's from Sue Stemley. And Sue, do you have a connection with Bio? So, so if Sue has a connection with Bio, maybe the next step is for Sue to contact Bio to see who was the point of contact for Dr. Fauci. Oh, they are. Oh, they're her customer. Okay. So, so if that's something Sue's comfortable with, but oh, you work, oh, great, great. So, so we have meeting planners from Bio in the PCMA network. Perfect. So somebody in your network has worked with Dr. Fauci as a speaker. So finding that person in your network and asking them if they could connect you with Dr. Fauci's person who does his, event planning and scheduling and conference work is a great line of influence. So action steps. Sue touches base with Bio to see if they can provide a contact for you for Dr. Fauci. And along with the name and the action, usually want a date because you want to make sure that you're following up with these folks. But I hope this has kind of opened up your eyes to how using a visual power map can really get your networks excited about helping you. We all are just separated by very few degrees. And I encourage all of you to use your LinkedIn, which is, basically a power map tech tool. But please do add me to your LinkedIn network because I would be happy to use my lines of influence to promote the great work that all of you are doing. And thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity to speak to you. Are there any other questions for me?
I don't see any questions in the Q&A. I'm just looking. Sarah said we have 5 minutes left if anybody has any questions or any thoughts that if anyone wants to share. I definitely believe, like I was saying to you earlier, that especially in today's climate for so many in the business, remembering connections and even using this format could be so helpful just for, personal action steps and getting to the next opportunity that you might want to have, right?
Christine, I used this 3 years ago when I was transitioning from women's issues to developmental disability. I actually had a little wine and cheese with some of my friends who were all from the DC area, and we sat down and we power mapped my next, job, which was kind of fun. Actually, I had a list of job opportunities, and I was thinking, okay, well, do I really want to work here? Do I know anyone here I can talk to? What can I do? And I used that power map and my small group of 3 or 4 friends. And while that wasn't exactly what led me to my job, it led me to a lot of great new lines of influence and a lot of great people. And it gave me the confidence to know that, my network was strong and that I didn't need those extras, fees or consultings or anything else, that I could rely on my own network that I'd built up over 40 years. To do this power map exercise and to get to the next level with my career.
I think that's great. And I definitely could see how even if you work for an organization, if you wanted to potentially look at even changing the path that you're on at this moment. Where could you take it, right? So using that power map to even map out your organization and see maybe what change you can make for yourself and how to get there.
Yeah, the best part of the power map is the journey. It's really fun to just, sit down and think about uh, who you already know. And it's almost like a treasure map that is like covered with sand. And with each bit of the power map, you peel away, a new line of influence. And then by the time you're done, you've got this awesome plan in front of you that you really hadn't, thought existed.
Well, thank you so much, Erin. We really appreciate everything you put in today's session. It was awesome. I really learned a lot from it, and thanks to everyone who participated. And we are going to go over back to, I believe, the general session space and have our networking reception.
Thank you. I'll enjoy
Have
your
a good
conference.
afternoon. Be safe.